July 11th, 2013. Wow, I can't believe how long it's been since I wrote in my diary. So much has been going on, I just haven't gotten around to it. I even failed to mention in my last entry that I got the cats adopted. One went to a sweet little girl with loving parents and a comfortable home. A couple went to a wife and husband that weren't able to have children, and the rest were adopted by a cat cafe. I can go visit them there. So, stuff I've accomplished. Remember when I said I made dolls out of people I killed? Well, I finally got done with Amy's and Seth's dolls. I hadn't got right to work on them because of the shed. They look pretty good, I think. I made Seth super fat and stuck pink little fuzzballs on his face for his pimples. They're now on my shelf with my doll collection. I also got the shed done. It's so pretty and looks like a real operating room, except of course that it's so small. The walls and linoleum are so sparkly white, it looks so very clean. Even after use, I was able to clean it up to look good as new. I have a couple counters made from small dressers I found at a dump. They're not the same size, but I cleaned them and painted them, and they just make the room look personalized. The drawers also give nice space to put stuff. I couldn't install a sink because I'm no plumber, so I simply have a basin I refill after every session. For the operating table, I found an old metal cart that would normally be used to stock stuff in a warehouse, but I took the wheels off and managed to nail it to the floor. I soldered some extra bars of metal for more support so it could hold a human, and also added some shackles to restrain the patient by their arms and legs. The light I'm using is an esthetician's lamp I found at an estate sale. You never know what you're gonna find at the most simplest of places. Anyway, I attached it to the head of the table, and it works perfectly for the brightest light. It also has a huge magnifying glass that, unfortunately, only reaches the face. That's okay, though. My other sources of light are the light bulb that was already in the shed, which I placed a paper lantern around, and the rest of the lighting is provided by the various square sconces attached to the wall. And like I said in previous entries, the entire shed is soundproof, so no screaming will be heard from the outside, or laughing. I also installed white shelves that hold my jars of stuff floating in formaldehyde. I plan on building a model of a skeleton once I collect all the perfect bones. It'll be so wonderful! Since it took so much work to make the shed pretty and perfect, I've only had one patient. He was this goth guy I met at Starbucks, who looked about 17 or so. Anyway, he was smoking outside and he offered me a cigarette. I said that I didn't smoke, and he was sort of rude about it. However, he still had the nerve to ask me to chill with him. So, I put on the charm I usually use on boys and got him to come to my house. Once there, it was so easy to use chloroform on him, I didn't want to knock him out because I needed his body in good condition. Oh, I feel I need to clear this up. I'm a virgin. I use my looks to lure, but I don't actually give myself away. That'd be terrible. Besides, the dudes think they're gonna get laid, and then they die disappointed. Stupid boys. Anyway, when he woke up, he was pretty pissed. He struggled at his chains violently and then started shouting and cussing at me, like every word was either fuck or bitch. It made me laugh. Was it still some kind of fad to cuss 10 times in one sentence? While he was yelling at me, I was looking through his wallet. His driver's license told me his name was Alexander Malloy. Pretty cool name. While he was still screaming at me and calling me a fucking cunt sack, I was pulling on my rubber gloves and apron, prepping for surgery. Surgery. I took a pair of large scissors and cut through his shirt, stripping it off. He didn't like that at all. Oh yes, care more about the shirt than your life. He must have been spoiled. You just turned 17, according to your license, I said calmly, setting the tray of implements on the closest counter. The tray was actually a baking pan. But you were smoking. It's illegal to smoke before the age of 18. Plus, it's disgusting. What the fuck do I care about this stupid law? He shrieked, still struggling and making quite a lot of noise. Well, you should care, I replied. They just want to make sure you don't get cancer. Kidnapping is illegal too, shouted Alexander. And so is murder, I said with a laugh. But that doesn't hurt me, does it? Rules that don't hurt the one breaking them don't matter. Well, that's not true, but I don't care. I'm gonna kill you. His screams were starting to hurt my ears, so I punched him. It stopped him momentarily, but he kept going. "Just shut up! No one will hear you!" I cried over his annoying adolescent voice. "This room is 100% soundproof. I tested it many times. I played Dragon Force as loud as it could go on my stereo, and I heard nothing from right outside." "Let me go!" Alexander bellowed, obviously not listening to me. I sighed and punched him as hard as I could in the balls. That shut him up instantly and even made him start crying. I was laughing now. "There, was that so hard?" I cooed. "Now, down to business. How good is your life?" Alexander managed a small squeak. "Well, judging by all your awesome goth clothes and accessories, I'd say you pretty much get whatever you want, right?" Still no verbal answer. "How rude. I can't believe you don't answer me." I gently placed a dishcloth over his face and dipped a paper cup into the basin to fill it with water. I knew Alexander didn't understand what I was doing, but he thrashed his head from side to side. The cloth was big enough to hug his head, so it didn't fall off. I slowly poured some water on the cloth, which soaked through to his face. Alexander gagged as he struggled even harder. I poured more water on him, smiling. I filled the cup and emptied it onto his face about 5 more times before I ripped the cloth off. I didn't want him to suffocate after all. He was gasping for air as he glared at me, face red from struggling so much. I rolled the cloth up and struck his bare chest several times by whipping it. He cried out as I left deep red marks on his abdomen. "Are you in pain?" I asked sweetly, but he just panted and glared at me. Stubborn little boys never learn, do they? I sifted through some drawers until I found a small vial that had a dropper attached to the underside of the cap. The vial had no label. "Want to know what this is?" I waited for a response, but he still made no sound, just glared daggers at me. I sighed and unscrewed the cap, squeezing the bulb to suck some of the liquid into the dropper. "It's found in your everyday household, used to clean, you know." I carefully held the dropper above Alexander's left eye. He started to thrash again, but I forced his head still with my free hand. Very slowly, I squeezed a single drop of the liquid, and it fell gracefully into his eye. In an instant, his silence turned into more shrill screams, and he pulled against his chains as if he thought he could break them. "Ammonia," I said simply, and quickly put a second drop in his right eye, which caused more yelling. "Painful, huh? Makes your eyes burn. Do you think I could get away with adding a drop of bleach to each eye without causing enough fumes to kill us?" Alexander's eyes were closed tight, and he was crying. Let's try it anyway." I found another vial, this time filled with bleach. I prepared a lot of little vials for procedures. I took the bleach and tried to get Alexander to open his eyes, but he wouldn't. I found this very frustrating. Looks like we gotta take a leaf out of Jeff's book," I joked, and I took a scalpel and seized one of Alexander's eyelids. I swiftly sliced through the thin skin, removing the eyelid completely. Do I even have to mention how much he was screaming at this point? I did the same with the other eyelid and finally was able to drip bleach into each eye. They were already extremely red to begin with, but I gasped at the sudden discovery. His eyeballs completely melted away. I have to remember that for the future. I could smell a hint of fumes from the mixture, so I quickly put on my surgeon's mask. I put on goggles too, just to be on the safe side. Then I pulled my light closer, the magnifier right up to his face. I looked through it and giggled. "I bet I can poke your brain!" I exclaimed over the moans Alexander was letting out. "Easy lobotomy, but too bad we're not doing that today. No, today we're going to explore inside of your torso. You got lots of goodies in there to play with." I took out a syringe and loaded it with a modified form of ketamine. It had been altered to keep the body from feeling pain, but also to keep the patient from suffering hallucinations, obviously not visual in this case, or experiencing euphoria. I wanted him conscious and horrified. I injected the ketamine into the jugular so it would spread faster. Despite being unable to feel pain, I wondered if he would be able to feel anything, like a small amount of pressure when cutting him open. I decided to wait and see. Alexander wasn't screaming anymore, just sort of whimpering. I assumed he had lost a lot of energy by now, which made it easier for me. I took my scalpel and cut a clean incision down the middle of his torso, and then 2 more horizontal ones, one at the top and one at the bottom, making a sort of door. "Tell me, Alexander," I said calmly, "can you feel that?" He didn't answer. "I suggest you answer me, or I'll wait until the ketamine wears off so you can feel the pain." He gave another whimper. I can feel it," he stuttered. "What does it feel like?" I asked. "Like I was wearing a shirt. but it got wet, so now it's cold, he replied. What are you doing to me? I kinda wish your eyes hadn't have melted, I said, 'cause then you'd get to see what I'm doing. What are you doing? He asked again. Oh, I just cut you open, I explained as I pinned the skin flaps open. Nothing crazy, just playing with your innards. Alexander tried screaming again, but his voice cracked and was very hoarse. I started humming to myself as I groped around with my hand to see what I could find. I grabbed something randomly and pulled. It was the pancreas. I sliced it away from the membranes it was attached to and set it beside Alexander's head on the table. I could tell that everything I was doing to him was still extremely uncomfortable. Ooh! I exclaimed suddenly. I just got the best idea! I carefully began to remove the small intestine, not wanting to damage anything important. Once I got it loose, I set it down momentarily and forced Alexander's mouth open. Then I used a rather large pair of scissors to cut his tongue off. I went down as far as I could reach so I could open up the throat, and he almost gagged on me. Next, I took one end of the intestine and brought it up to Alexander's face. I then forced his mouth open for the second time and carefully started snaking the long organ down his throat. He began to splutter and make choking sounds as I pushed the slippery thing down his esophagus. Once it passed a certain point, I had a little trouble pushing the intestine further, and I had to jump out of the way as Alexander vomited. Ugh, I said in disgust, glad I had a mask on so I couldn't smell it. I was also thankful for my rubber gloves as I continued to guide the intestine right down into his stomach. It was very amusing to watch his stomach expand slightly as I stuffed it inside. I wondered what would happen if I was able to get the whole thing in there. I mean, the small intestine alone is like around 22 to 23 feet, and Alexander's stomach was just a little bigger than his fist, but it wasn't staying that size as the bowel filled it up. Alexander kept coughing up fluids as I continued to trail the organ down, and his stomach began to look like an overly air-filled balloon. I watched, and I soon started to see stretches in the membrane that grew pale and transparent compared to the rest of it, and then the organ tore. I still had a couple feet left, but the stomach couldn't hold anymore. The intestine was bulging out of the rip slightly, making the stomach look like a wet egg sack filled with worms. I let the rest of the intestine go, and it slapped Alexander in the face. I rinsed my gloved hands in the basin, then returned to my patient. He was twitching slightly, his body still seeming to try and force the bowel out of his stomach. I knew it wouldn't be able to, because that was a lot to swallow. The next thing I inspected was his lungs. He must have been illegally smoking for a long time, because they were already pretty dark. They were expanding and contracting very fast as Alexander breathed rapidly. I smiled and simply punctured one of the lungs with my scalpel, deflating it. He seemed to have a little more trouble breathing now. See, maybe if you hadn't been a smoker, breathing with one lung wouldn't be so hard, I giggled. Then I extracted the inactive lung, making the heart more visible, and tossed it aside onto the floor. It landed with a comical splat. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next, so I started severing the organs from their membranes and putting them in different places. I stuck his pancreas in the huge gap where the lower intestine had been, but I left the remaining lung and the heart alone for now. Finally, once Alexander's innards were all helter-skelter and his breathing was significantly slower, I turned to the heart. I had a lot of practice with this muscle, so I knew exactly how to handle it. I slowly started to slice through the pericardium with my scalpel, being careful not to rupture the heart itself. When the flesh of the heart was exposed, I was able to move to the next step. I grabbed yet another syringe, but this one was filled with a very highly concentrated form of caffeine. I knew caffeine was bad for you in large quantities and can cause death, but I wanted to see how the heart actually reacted to it. I carefully pushed the small needle through the wall's 3 layers and injected the caffeine serum. Then I stood back and watched. I didn't think it would react so quickly. The heart began to pound faster and faster, twitching as if Alexander was having a severe heart attack. His lung was also working extra hard to keep him breathing. I had never seen anything like this, not on medical shows, not in other victims, never! It was fascinating. As I continued to watch the heart pulse rapidly, I clenched my hands tightly with suspense. And then, with a few more jagged pumps, the heart practically burst. Specifically, what I saw it do was expand to its full size and then quickly deflate. I guess the human body is just full of balloons. Alexander soon stopped moving, as did his lung and any other organ that had still been intact enough to keep trying to work. I decided to do something funny. I sliced open the heart and placed in a small rubber ducky I had in one of my drawers, along with like 20 other rubber duckies. Then I sewed the heart back up, including the pericardium. Next, I started sewing all the organs in their wrong places. I left the lung alone, and the second lung remained on the floor, but I stuck a pack of cigarettes I found in Alexander's pocket to replace it. Finally, I sewed the entire body back up. The small intestine was still trailing out of his mouth, and his eye sockets were caked with dried blood. I left those alone because they looked cool. I managed to wrap his shirt over him like a jacket, and I carried him out of the shed. Good thing I had a rather tall fence. There was a trail outside my house that led through a very small bit of woods and to a bridge stretching over a filthy creek. Cars couldn't go past here, and people didn't usually go in unless it was some teenagers doing awful stuff. Oh, the things I found, shuddered. So anyway, I ditched Alexander's body in the creek. He laid face down in the water, little minnows nipping at his face. Someone would probably find his body soon enough, and then the pathologist would perform an autopsy and see all the fun stuff I did to the body. It should be pretty amusing for them. Yep, that was what I've been doing for the past couple of months. I have more plans for future patients and the procedures I will do. I want to try reconstructive surgery next. I have to think of what to make them into. Anyway, I'm gonna go make Alexander's doll. I don't know when I'll write next because I'll be so busy, but I'll let you know what the news says about his body. I hope they mention the duck inside the heart.